Build skills with experts anytime, anywhere. Get certified, get ahead. The world's largest selection of courses, affordable online courses and learning opportunities, top categories.
The Ethical Hacking Malware Threats course. This course is the 7th course in our series on ethical hacking. This certification prep course will help you to prepare for the CEH 312-50 exam. In this course, we're going to cover the skills measured in the system hacking phase and attack techniques objective in the exam guide. This objective is found in the system hacking section of the exam guide, and it'll account for about 17% of the total questions in the exam. System hacking phase and attack test files, you're going to find a helpful study guide that I put together for you that you can use to follow along during your certification prep course for CEH 312-50 exam. This study guide, as I mentioned before, is going to help you with some key concepts, and I've even included some practice questions to give you an idea of the content you'll be tested on. I'm happy to join you in your certification prep journey with the Ethical Hacking Malware Threats Council 312-50 exam. Now, in order to make sure that you're prepared to watch this course, I want to make sure that you've gone back and you've watched all the other courses in this series, because I'm basing some of the phrasing and concepts that I'm going to be throwing at you off the fact that you are familiar with enumeration or different scanning techniques or reconnaissance or system hacking techniques. But what we're going to focus in here is basically the hard truth behind malware. Now, I'm going to warn you folks up front, this is probably one of the biggest threats that we have from a security perspective for both our networks in our professional capacity as well as our own private networks and devices. And the hardest struggle that IT folks have to deal with is the concept, as I've mentioned in previous courses, and even end users have to deal with this too. We just don't realize it. We have gotten so complacent and so much in the mindset that if a network works or a device works, that's cool. We don't really care how it works. Nathaniel Braden, who's a motivational speaker, and he does a lot of self-help books as well as public speaking, he says the first step towards change is awareness, and the second step is acceptance. This kind of reminds me of a movie. It's one of my favorite movies. It's called The Untouchables with Sean Connery and Kevin Costner. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. You can call this a class assignment if you'd like. In it, Kevin Costner plays Elliot Ness, one of the Untouchables, and Sean Connery plays a street cop who is very much aware of the environment of Chicago. And Sean Connery's character tells Kevin Costner's character, as he's telling him he's going to go after Al Capone, he reveals to him all the stuff that's going on, and he says, "What are you willing to do about it?" Again, are we going to be complacent? Or are we going to start thinking a little bit differently here? Now, this is actually one of my favorite courses to teach. In fact, I wish it's a course that everyone could watch. And no, I'm not telling you to go upload this to YouTube. In my career, I often do a lot of free public events that are designed around the community. And in them, I try to teach parents that they can't have a blind eye to technology that's being used, especially by our children, and even the devices that we use as adults. There's so many times that I hear, "I love this particular device." Okay, I'm going to be honest. I hear this all the time about one particular product line, Apple. They always say that it just works, and that's why they like it, but they don't understand why it works or how it works, and that's where we have the problem. So what is malware? Well, let me break out my rap music and break it down for you. To make it easy, malware is simply a piece of software or a computer program that's used to perform malicious attacks or actions on a target. Technically, doesn't the name of it tell you what it's going to do? Yeah, we take malicious plus software and we get, malware. As far as the attacker is concerned, our overall goal is to infect any device. And there's malware out there not just for computers and laptops, but for phones, for tablets, for IoT devices, for industrial control devices. The mobile industry is huge in malware right now. Once installed, the attacker can potentially gain total control over your devices, or at least over the data on your devices. Now, many people have a misconception that malware is only a Windows issue, but technically attackers really don't care. They're going to affect any computing device, including, again, our tablets, smartphones, our thermostats, whatever we can get our hands on. So a person or a company or a device is a target. Hello? Hello? I mean you. The more computers and devices an attacker can infect, the more money they make. In fact, they really don't care who they infect as long as they infect as many devices and people as possible. Because let's face it, it's a numbers game. And guess what? It comes in various forms. And when I say various forms, I mean a ton of different forms. For example, we have viruses, we have worms, we have Trojans, which again, we'll talk about all these coming up. I just want to give you an overview of really how many different types or variations of malware that there are out there. You can see it's kind of scary how many that there are. Now, these could actually go through do anything from deleting files to slowing down computers to even stealing data. Now, some of the goals of malware includes the ability to steal data right off your systems, gathering customer lists, accounting data. Maybe we can harvest usernames and passwords, not just yours, but anyone who's been on that machine. Now, it's usually at this point I hear somebody say, Dale, I'm broke. I really don't care if they steal my data. They can have my bank account. Well, guess what? I might not be after you financially. Yeah, I could just be after your resources, using your resources to go after bigger targets that could make me money. Malware programmers are actually creating these type of software issues for us to do things like attack browsers and gather websites that have been visited, degrade system performance. This is normally done in like a denial of service attack, right? Usually caused by a piece of malware or could be an external attack. We also have the issue of them causing hardware failures because of performance issues, erasing valuable data, attacking other systems from the compromised system. We call that pivoting. And even spamming inboxes with advertisements. Not just spamming you individually or your company, but I could use some of your resources to send out spam to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. Now, the people who create, deploy, and actually benefit from malware can range from a whole scope of individuals who are just trying to hack their own internal networks to organized crime. Folks, this is big money, as well as, yep, guess what? Even government organizations. And in fact, this is such a big business here, or I'm going to use air quotes around business, that people are creating sophisticated malware products that are often dedicated to just that purpose. You know, believe it or not, software as a service. And this actually ends up snowballing, because if I can get one piece of malware installed on you, I can use additional pieces of malware as well. And again, this is so profitable here, folks, that it is actually becomes a full-time job for individuals. And you may be thinking, well, how do they make money off of this? Well, first of all, once they've developed and deployed their malware, they will often sell all the machines that they've infected to other attackers or other malicious organizations. And those individuals can go through and start to install more pieces of malware. And again, this is where the snowballing effect comes into play. And we end up eventually having your machine being a member of a botnet. Now, this botnet is basically a mishmash of systems out there that are totally controlled by the attacker. And the botnet can be remotely controlled, which cyber criminals then go through and use for their own purposes. Or again, they might sell it to somebody else. So again, the reason why we see such a big influx right now in malware Oh, wow. I didn't even talk about ransomware, talk about financially beneficial, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. So again, the reason why we see such a big influx right now of malware is because, well, it is so stinking profitable. And quite frankly, it's going to be a pain in our backside. Let's make sure that you have a really good understanding of how to speak Trojan. So folks that may actually create malware, as well as attackers that are out there, they're going to create malware using components that can actually help them achieve the goal that they have in mind. And they can use malware to steal, again, information, delete files, change system settings, things we've talked about already. Ooh, forgot to talk about encrypting it though. So the basic components of malware that you may want to make a note of for your immediate future, wink, wink, hint, hint, nudge, nudge. We first have what they refer to as a cryptor. The cryptor is basically a reference to a software program that can conceal the existence of malware. Attackers and hackers are going to use this software to elude antivirus from detecting it. It also protects the malware from undergoing what we refer to as reverse engineering analysis. There's also a downloader. The type of Trojans that download the other types of malware or malicious code, or even the files off the internet that we want to inject, would be considered a downloader. Now, usually attackers install downloaders when they first gain access to the system. We then have something called a dropper. This is just basically if an attacker needs to install malware or some type of code on the system to make it run. A dropper will do this for them covertly. We'll actually talk about that here in just a few minutes, but a dropper can contain unidentifiable malware code that again goes undetected by antivirus scanners, and it's capable of downloading again additional files as needed to execute the malware on the target system. We then have exploits. Now, part of the malware that contains the code or the sequence of commands that it takes to take advantage of your device, and that's what an exploit is. It's the code that attackers use to breach the system's security. Now, based off the top vulnerabilities that an attacker might use, the exploits might have different categories, including local exploits as well as remote exploits. We also have what they refer to as injector. This program injects the exploit or the code from the malware into the system. And it's a way of basically hiding or preventing the malware from being removed. And it just basically reloads it over and over. We also have obfuscators. These are programs that the attacker uses to conceal the malware or the malicious code. And they do this with different types of techniques. It makes it a lot harder for security programs like antivirus, anti-malware programs, and security professionals to find it and remove it. And let's see, there's also, the packer. This software compresses the malware file and converts its code to an unreadable format so that your software or your antivirus software can't detect it. You can see we got a lot of stuff here going on as far as keeping antivirus products from finding us, right? We also have the payload. The payload is actually the file that is activated. The payload could be used again for deleting your files, infecting systems, encrypting it. It's basically the big bad boy. And finally, we have the malicious code. This is a piece of code that's, malicious. It defines the basic functionality of malware and comprises of the commands that result in the security breach itself. And it can take the forms of things like ActiveX controls, publish content, Java apps, browser plugins, and the list goes on. Now, did you make a note of all those for your immediate future? Okay, let's move on. Hey, Dale, how does malware actually get in? That's actually a great question. I know, I sound like Kermit the Frog, don't I? Unintentional. We've already talked about how a standard user usually brings in a majority of it, but malware itself can actually be broken down into two different types, either propagation or concealment. Now, when it comes to propagation, some examples of those would include things like a virus, which does require user assistance, meaning I have to execute a file in order to infect the system with the virus. We also see worms. Now, worms are typically automatic, meaning that there are no interactions required. Sidebar, you're going to want to know these differences in your immediate future. Now, they typically, as far as propagation is concerned, don't need human interaction. That's why they're called worms. They just squirm throughout all your network infrastructure, infecting all the targets they come in contact with. Another type of malware that we see is referred to as concealment malware. And we've talked about some of these in the past, ones that are actually designed to hide themselves. We talked about rootkits back in our system hacking course. But basically, the concept behind rootkits is that it's designed to hide itself by modifying the operating system so it's not visible to an end user. Another type is called a Trojan. And a Trojan is simply a code that's been hidden inside of a file that you want to get, or I should say the user wants to get. And we'll actually get more in depth in Trojans coming up within this course. Now, when it comes to malware, we have several different ways that we can deploy. Let's take a look at each one of these. We'll first start off with the insider attack. An insider attack is a security breach that's caused or implemented by somebody who's a part of the organization. It could actually be an employee, a contractor, or a vendor, or, yeah, believe it or not, IT professional, including developers. Because us IT folks are invincible and we don't do, yeah, it happens. Now, the reason why I include developers is because developers have this tendency, or again, it could be anybody in the IT department that will create what we refer to as backdoors. A backdoor, which we also refer to sometimes as a trapdoor, is simply a hidden feature or possibly a command that allows a user to actually implement a command. So the application would run just as it normally would run until we actually do something that executes the backdoor, until we activate the backdoor. Kind of like an Easter egg. Have you ever seen an Easter egg on a, piece of software, sometimes even on DVDs? Like Android, it's actually been doing Easter eggs for some time. You can go in and look at the settings for your Android device. You go down and rapidly tap on the version of Android, and based off its type, if it's cupcake, then we see a cupcake show up. If it's jelly bean, we see a bunch of jelly beans show up. If it's version 11, we get a dial like a clock. Yeah, I don't know where they came up with that one. Now, again, Easter eggs are typically not destructive. It's just showing you that I'm here inside the settings, and it's a hidden feature thing that if you activate it, I'll do something to make you laugh. It's typically done by the developers. Now, we also have something called a logic bomb. A logic bomb is based off of the fact that this piece of malware is going to go through and activate itself based off of what we refer to as a logical condition. Let me give you an example. Have any of you seen a movie called Superman 2 with Richard Pryor? Okay, that's your next homework assignment. Okay, no, not really. I'm not going to torture you. It's really a bad show. But in the movie, Richard Pryor decides to go and learn about computers, and he becomes this big computer expert. And he figures out a way that with all the money that's being transferred between banks he's working for, that he could just round up the cents, the fractions between different transactions. And he would take the difference between those transactions, round them up, and move those differences over to his own account. He ends up having hundreds of thousands of dollars. And back in the 1980s, when this movie came out, it was a lot of money. So again, this was a logic bomb that was going off because whenever a transaction took place, it executed. Now, many times we see these type of logic bombs based off time and date. A great example of this is the famous Omega bomb. No, I'm not talking about some superhero bomb. Omega Man! This case actually took place back in 1996, and it took place with a company called Omega Engineering. This was the first federal computer sabotage case that happened. Now, what actually happened here is there's a gentleman by the name of Timothy Lloyd, who was a network manager and administrator for Omega Engineering. And he started to get written up for some performance issues. And so he started to look for another job, but he was still a little upset. So what he decided to do was create a logic bomb. He went through first and created a user account that was called 12345, and it had no password and had full admin rights. Now, Omega Engineering had a policy that all employees had to save their data and their work on the centralized server. And their policy said that they could not make own backups. So he developed a logic bomb on his own workstation and then moved it to the server when he realized that he was probably going to be fired. Now, he also went and requested a backup tape from HR of all the data, and it was the most recent backup. He then went through and used his logic bomb that he wrote to basically say that if his account did not log in after 20 days, it would then execute the following command. It was simply to switch over to the network drive, which was the F drive, with the username of 12345 with no password, change into the directory of public, and then run a program called fix.exe. Now, fix.exe was his program. It was actually Diltree from the old DOS days, which allowed an administrator to delete files. And as it deleted, it first would ask you, are you sure you want to delete? And then on the screen, it would say, deleting. Well, he went through and changed it. So instead of deleting, it said fixing. And yeah, he said to delete everything with the /y option for yes, meaning it didn't prompt a user for any response. And then he did a wildcard, which means to delete everything. And then finally, he issued a purge command, which basically made it so the files were unrecoverable from the backup. And to cover his tracks, he also erased the backup tapes. Omega Engineering did business with the United States Navy and NASA. So, yeah, the Secret Service got involved on this one, folks. And when they raided his home, they actually found the same logic bomb on his computer where he'd been playing around with it, as well as they discovered the tapes that had been erased. Now, financially, Omega spent nearly $2 million trying to repair programs and lost nearly $10 million in sales, which also resulted in about 80 people being laid off. Mr. Lloyd was convicted of computer sabotage and was sentenced to 41 months in federal prison. Finally, the good guys win one, huh? Well, there was still some destruction, but at least he was caught. Now, there's several different methods for a piece of malware to get into your environment. One of them is what we refer to as untrusted sources for software. And again, I want you to think not just our desktop platforms. I want you to think about mobile devices here as well. But when you go and search for a piece of software on your PC or your Mac, let's say, for example, a compression utility. I'm going to use WinZip as an example. Are you actually going to winzip.com, or are you just doing a Google search and clicking on the first link? Well, that first link may not actually be the vendor itself. So you install that piece of software. And of course, whenever end users see pop-ups along the way, they just hit yes, yes, yes. They never hit no. Why? Because they want the software. And then Bob's your uncle. The attacker's getting in. Another way we get through is via installation. There are many times that I go to install a program, and again, based off what I just told you, when we select install, we hit next, next, next. A lot of times we get the option of express install or custom install. I always select custom install. I never do express or basic because I'm watching. I never hit click, 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 click. I always take my time because many times the application or vendor is, again, generating additional revenue by installing toolbars or additional software, which can lead to other malware infecting you. It also gets in through propagation. Once you get one, I guarantee you're going to start getting more and more pieces of malware. That's why typically when we see a system that's been infected, it doesn't have one infection. It's got several. Another way is by not updating or running any type of, I actually call it anti-ware, but it's actually anti-malware and antivirus solutions. Antiviruses can't, these type of programs can't necessarily get all the malware, because sometimes the malware attacks the antivirus solution. But again, in my experience, whenever I see a system that has a problem, I'm referencing my nephews and nieces. When they say, hey, Uncle Dale, I'm having a problem with my system, they've got malware. It's normally they didn't want to pay the, I don't know, $30, $40 for antivirus software updates or renewals. So yeah, not updating stuff or not running antivirus and malware can be a huge detriment. Some other ways that malware can get in. Yeah, this is really popular right here. Instant messenger apps. You know, like Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp Messenger, LinkedIn Messenger, all the messaging apps, including things like Google Hangouts or ICQ. Come on, everybody fess up here. How many times have you gotten a message from somebody saying, hey, click here? Hopefully you haven't. Or if you have, you've learned a lesson. Removable devices and portable media is another way. We actually talked about this earlier in reconnaissance, doing a USB drop where somebody finds a USB drive and they plug it in because they want to know what's on it. Outdated browsers often have a lot of vulnerabilities. In fact, when was the last time you updated your browser? Do you know how? It's really easy. You typically go to your hamburger menu, about that particular browser, and it updates automatically for you. And when you see an update, for example, for Chrome, it's all the Chromium browsers like Edge and Brave. But the same applies for Safari and almost any other browser. The same scenario occurs while checking emails with older email programs that don't know how to securely handle links and images. If you're not updating your application software as often as you should be, which in some cases I've seen some real nightmares out there. Attackers are going to actually use this type of an exploit to inject software and malware into your systems. So make sure you're patching. I think I've talked to you enough already about decoy applications, right? Where we see this happen quite a bit on torrent sites or torrents, where, you know, you may be thinking that you're downloading the latest version of Microsoft Office, or personally, even some of these sites that claim to be download sites, you know, the websites that have all the freeware on them just in a centralized location. I'm kind of leery about those. Some of them are industry branded and known, and I'm okay with that. But there are some that I'm like, Billy Bob's downloads. Again, do you trust them? And we see a lot of malware entering through what they refer to as downloading files. I know that seems really simple, but what we're talking about here is when users download internet-driven applications like music players, movies, games, greeting cards, screensavers. They think that they're getting legitimate software, but they're getting it from a malicious site. Or even documents that have macros in them, like a Word document. Maybe it's a Word document on how to cure COVID. And I'm just waiting for you to open it up. And this includes PDF files, by the way, folks. And as we mentioned in our ethical hacking, system hacking course, we talked about that I can embed them instead of audio and video files. So yeah, go ahead and pirate that latest Marvel movie or Michael Jackson or pop artist CD, audio CD, and see what happens. And as we talked about propagation, I've already mentioned to you that, again, once we get one piece of software that's malicious, it will typically go through and reconnect to the malware operator's site, and just using standard browsing protocols, start downloading additional software onto your machine without your knowledge. There's also email attachments. Again, folks, I know this is really basic, but we don't open what we're not expecting. File sharing. This is another one for you, especially in the Windows world. If I can open up Network Neighborhood or my network places or whatever it is on whatever version that you're running, and I can drill into systems and see their resources, their drives, an attacker could actually start, sharing malware with you. They can also use denial of service attacks to shut down systems, force a reboot so that the Trojan can restart itself right away. And we can't forget the old wireless stuff, right? Connecting to open networks where we have hardware and software devices that are designed to capture network traffic, including things like usernames and passwords as people authenticate. Yes, you can see there's a plethora. That's my favorite word. I'm going to tell you why coming up. Now, as far as some common techniques to distribute malware, we have things like black hat SEO, search engine optimization. This goes back to the aspect of when you do a Google search or a DuckDuckGo search and you type in WinZip, is the first entry that you're about to click on the actual vendor, right? Talked about that earlier. We also have social engineered clickjacking, where the attacker is going to inject malware into websites that appear legitimate to trick users onto clicking them. And when you click it, the malware that's embedded in the link executes, and Bob's my uncle, I'm back in. We also have spear phishing sites, mimicking legitimate institutions like Citibank. So you log in or verify your credit card account information, and it's really not Citibank, it's my site. Then we have malvertising. Yeah, that's a new one for you, right? This is where we have embedded malware laden advertisements so that every site that runs our ad is my channel for distributing my malware. This has been pretty big in the past because some of them have gotten past some of these advertisement agencies, and we've seen these type of malicious malvertisings on legitimate sites. MSN was hit at one point. Most of the news agencies were also hit because they were all pulling from the same advertising agency, which somebody had uploaded a bad ad. We also have compromised websites. Yeah, if the website's not locked down, an attacker can get into it. He's going to do quite a bit of hacking so that he can implement some malware. When a user hits the site, you actually install the malware. So, yeah. And then we have drive-by downloads. This is where the attacker exploits different types of flaws in a browser to install malware simply by visiting a website. Scary deal. I know. One more for you. Spam emails. Yeah, I know. Good old reliable, right? The reason why we still see it is because guess what, folks? It works. If it didn't, they wouldn't be using it. Normally, this type of malware injection is done because the victim clicks on an attachment or a link because they want to collect their millions of dollars since they're a relative of the King of Africa or Nigeria. Okay, Dale, I believe. Give me a sign. Okay, I'll give you a sign. In fact, go look at your processes running on a system that you suspect has an issue. One, does it have an icon associated to it, or is there just a process running? Look at the description. Does the application itself or the process running live inside the Windows directory or a user profile directory? Guess what? Those directories are accessed by any user on that device. Are there any bizarre strings in the URLs? Especially if someone sends you a link. Okay, folks, trust me on this one. Be careful about the latest trend where people are creating shortcut links to websites. Bitly. You know what? I'll show you what I mean here in just a second. But also look for any open TCP/IP endpoints where your machine is just listing on a port that you can't explain. You know what? I'm a big fan of visual. I have to see it to get it. But that's the way I learn. And I'm going to make sure I cover it because I know there's other people that learn the same way. So let's jump into a demo. Okay, so in this demo, I'm going to take you in and take a look at the Task Manager, as well as something called Process Explorer, which if you're not using this bad boy, you should be. Okay, so here I am on, this is my own personal machine. So you can see, ooh, don't hack me. You know what I got opened. But you can see that Task Manager, at least if you haven't seen it in a while, it's come a long ways. In fact, several years ago, Microsoft actually obtained sysinternals, and they took some of the tools that they had available, which I'll show you here in just a second, with Process Explorer, and they incorporated it inside of Task Manager, which it's a good thing. Now, as an example here, I can go through and I can see that I'm running several different tools here, or applications. I got my Camtasia up and running. I'm going to switch over here to my Details tab. And this is where the power of Task Manager or Process Explorer comes into play. The first thing that I always like to do, or I try to teach people to do, is to sort by PID. Because anything over 2000 is typically something that's been loaded after the user is logged in. Or I should say, it's not a part of the operating system itself. In fact, if I scroll down here a bit, it's just some of these earlier PIDs, you'll notice that some of them have icons and others don't. Well, the ones that don't have icons are normally just operating system-based applications and programs that are running. But I'm going to scroll back on up here so we can play around a bit. And you'll notice here that I've got something called Logitune. This is actually for my Logitech camera. But the cool thing about this one is I can right-click on it. Let's say that I don't know what this is. Because first of all, I'm going to look at, I talked about the description column, right? Does it look legit? Is there anything? Matter of fact, I've seen some where there was nothing. And that was a file that kind of was suspicious to me. But in this case here, you can see it's called Logitune. Some cases you can see who the vendor is. But I'm going to go ahead and just, again, pretend like I don't know what the heck this is for. I'm going to right-click on it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the file location. And in this case here, the file location looks like it's inside of Program Files, Logitech, Logitune. Oh, hey, and there it is right there at the bottom. That might give me a hint of what that particular program is for. Let's do this. Let's take a look at something like, let's just look at the SVC host, and let's look at its file location. It should be, yep, inside of the System32 directory. I'm going to go ahead and close that one down. The other thing I can do is, if I'm not sure what it is I can right-click on it and select, I'd like to go to the properties for that particular program, and this gives me some additional information, including things like the details. Details on most malicious programs won't be filled out like this is filled out, like copyright information. I don't know, maybe I'm giving attackers some keynotes here to make their product better. But you can see the version name, when it was last modified, and I can even come over here to the digital signatures and see that it was signed, the driver itself or the program itself was signed by Logitech using SHA-1 back, let's see when this was, December 5th of 20-something. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. And I'm also going to come into the startup section to see what programs are designed to start up. And then again, if I suspect something, or in this case here, if I don't want something like Teams running every time that I launch my system, I can disable or re-enable. And again, I get really suspicious anytime I see something without an icon. This actually has an icon. It's just white. You can't see it, or maybe you can. Kind of faded there. And I happen to know what VMware is for. Again, I can right-click on it, go to the file location area, or the properties. Now, something else I want to show you too, they actually got this from the next tool that I'm going to show you here in just a second. And that is, again, if you don't know what something is, let's take, for example, the Game Bar FT server. Obviously, the description tells me it's related to Xbox, but let's go ahead and pretend like we don't know what this is for. I can right-click on it and select to search online. And this is going to open up a web browser that takes me, that basically does a, yeah, I know, go figure, Microsoft Bing search. But you can change this over to a Google search if you want. But it shows me very quickly what it's actually for. So I can click on this, belongs to the Xbox game bar, shows you where it's supposed to be located. Great little option here. This is a website called FileNet, but there are other ones available too that you can look for. Okay, let me show you the other tool. So this is Process Explorer. It's part of the sysinternal suite, and you can see that it's picking up kind of the same thing, but the information I get here is a little bit more in depth. Instead of, for example, just the svchost.exe, it breaks down which applications are using that. This is the tool I mentioned back in Ethical Hacking, System Hacking, where I told the story of Mark Burnett and I discovering a full FTP server running on a client's box. We discovered it because we saw a service running inside of Process Explorer that was called SVC hosts, plural, not singular. And we were able to go through and look at the properties, and you can see the properties here a little bit more in detail than what we get with regular Task Manager. From here, it gives you the direct location of where it's launching from. If there's an auto start location, what's cool, you know what, let me close this one down because I don't want to do it with that particular option. Let's come in here and select Brave, and I'm going to go ahead and select properties again. And what's cool is I can go through and say, hey, I'd like to use virus total. It submitted the hash, and it came back and showed me that according to virustotal.com, there are no viruses out of 72 different search engines, which I really enjoy, knowing that that particular file is free of any problems. You can come into the Performance tab, see the performance. You can see it in a graph if you'd like. There's also a GPU graph if it's using any GPU services. You can see the threads, but you have to download and install the Microsoft debugging tools for Windows to see that. And here you can see the threads that are running. We can also come into TCP, IP. If it was accessing any external or remote IP addresses, they would appear here. Here's my security, who has access. You can see it's very detailed information that can actually help you determine if anything in here running is a piece of malware. So you can see I don't have any threats. Sorry, I must be getting hungry. So why is malware so popular? Let's take a look at the numbers behind it. Now, a recent attack breaches by SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline, let's see who else, LinkedIn, Facebook, Zoom, Twitter, Marriott Hotels, and more. Just an example of how destructive malware can be to an organization's reputation and their stability. Now, there's an organization that's called Ponemon Institute, which conducts research so that they can see how much money people are spending, or should I say companies are spending on protecting themselves. And let me tell you, I might be in the wrong business after seeing some of these numbers. First, on average, the number of malware alerts that a company receives is about 20,000 per week. And you may be thinking, wow, that's a lot, Dale. Here's the scary part, is that only about 4% are investigated. And that's typically because of the fact that of all the false positives and becoming complacent is concerned. The other issue is that the average cost for ransomware breach is about $4.62 million. That's the average for a full-on breach by ransomware. Now, as far as payments are concerned, the average payment is about $150,000, which is actually down from $200,000 about a year ago. But it's not all good news, because the bad side of it is that attackers are actually switching up, and including businesses of all different sizes now are being attacked. Mom-and-pop stores, all the way up to obviously the Inc. 500 companies. Now, we also have the fact that 71% of the companies have been hit. Yeah, they've actually been hit. And 61% say that it's disrupted their business flow. So, yeah, it can cost us quite a bit. 60% say that they're understaffed to handle the investigation of malware. That kind of goes back to that whole 4% issue, right? Now, on average, we are seeing anywhere from 300 million pieces of malware, and we're actually starting to see a trend of about 44% increase year over year of that. But of the malware that's coming out, our biggest concern out there right now is mobile, because it is a key target, and it will continue to be so until the next technology comes out that makes it convenient for us to access information, or becomes such a part of our lives that is so integrated. Yeah, wait till cybernetic implants become an issue. And here's the other issue with malware, is that we're actually discovering that some companies, software companies that is, are knowingly putting malware in their products, or what we would classify as malware. Have you downloaded an application on your tablet, your phone? And when you do so, typically it has the permissions that you want to give that particular application. I like to install a game, and I want them to have access to my contacts. Are you kidding me? Now, I could go on and on about mobile, but we have a dedicated course in this series just for mobile. Yeah, but yeah, that's okay. We use a lot of virtual machines, so we think our systems are pretty... Yeah, guess what? 28% of malware products are VMware-ware. Now, the numbers keep getting worse, at least in my book. As far as the study is concerned, it shows that administrators that they interview report that 75% of malware gets installed by end users. 71% have protection in place, but 39% actually audit those protection devices and software programs each year. Guess what? Only 39% and less said that they audited those programs. Well, guess what? That's where I slap my hand against my forehead. Are you kidding me? And on top of that, at the end user level, it's actually worse. End users, at least according to them, their biggest fear is that 60% say that they're afraid of losing their data. We hear about identities being stolen all the time. Many times they're just given up by the user. They're just being socially engineered to either install in a piece of malware, or they just give the information up because the malware makes them think that they're updating their antivirus. 51% are afraid of online fraud. I would have thought that was a little bit higher, but there may be a lot of people that are too old to worry about that internet stuff. But regardless, this is a shocker for me. Are you ready? 43% don't install security updates. Yeah. I don't even know how many times I go to family members, even in business environments, and I'm like, how come you haven't done your Windows updates? I didn't know if I should install them. Folks, they're called security updates. So I'm going to go back and let me give you an analogy. You go off and you buy a brand new Tesla. Do you want to just start driving around and not care about it? Or are you going to read the owner's manual? Did you learn every little thing about this expensive car? What it'll do? What it can do for you? Yet today we go off and buy smartphones and tablets and just start downloading, my pet peeve, pirated software. Oh yeah, I'm going there. Listen to me very carefully. You wanting to save $39 on an application by pirating me? Trust me, you're going to spend more than $39 trying to fix your identity. I know, I'm being really serious, but you guys are probably used to me being jovial and happy all the time. But it really becomes hard for me when I see people be so complacent and, to be quite honestly, sometimes lazy. But hey, I like to call it job security. Okay, let's do our learning checks. If I was to tell you that we had some type of malware that infected our system and it went off because of either an action or a time or a condition, what type of malware am I talking about? Yep, a logic bomb. Now, there's actually a component of malware that's in reference to a software program that conceals the existence of malware. type of software is this? Yep, it's the crypter. What about a type of Trojan that goes out and brings more malware into your system? Yeah, that's the downloader. We also had a piece of software that would install malware that contained unidentifiable malware code and help the attacker install it. Yep, that's the dropper. What about the part of malware that contains the code or the sequences of commands? Yeah, that's the exploit. We also had software that compresses, there's a hint, the malware, and converts the code so it's unreadable. Yep, that's the packer. And what is the name of the actual file that gets activated, that goes through and does the deletion of files and infects the system? Yep, that's the payload. Okay, here's one for you. What type of an attack is it? When it's caused by someone who's a part of the organization. They click on a link they shouldn't. Yeah, we call that an insider attack. We actually mentioned that also back in the ethical hacking system hacking course. Then we talked about something that refers to the aspect of you visiting a website and you just automatically get a piece of malware installed. Yeah, that's called the drive-by downloads. And then we also talked about one of the techniques that we use to distribute malware on the internet. And it's basically if I can get my link to appear first in Google. What do we call that? Yeah, that's black hat SEO. Okay. So again, if you struggled with any of these, make sure you go back and watch those clips. Make sure that they get solidified in our brain. Okay, let's next move on to discussing advanced persistent threats. We also call them APTs.